Hello there, this is AD Robles, and you're listening to AD on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network. All right. Well, I've got my ketogenic mint chocolate chip ice cream. It's from Aldi. It's very, very good. It is Thursday evening. This is a late episode. Maybe I can't eat while I'm doing this. Anyway, sorry about the lateness. I had a big day. I put up a wall in my new office. It's just, things are happening here. Things are happening. But I wanted to get to this thread because it occurred to me today that a lot of people, there's new people that follow me on Twitter every day. There's new people that follow my YouTube channel every week or so, that kind of thing. And you might not know my story. You might not know kind of how this all started and all that kind of stuff. And I think it might be relevant when you see how I deal with BigEva, or even why I talk about BigEva, that kind of thing. It might make sense. It might give it more context if you know a little bit about me. And it's not like I woke up one morning and just decided I hated BigEva and I'm going to just rip BigEva all day, every day, all day long. That didn't happen. There's a story behind why I talk about the things that I talk about, why I talk in the way that I talk, and things like that. So what I wanted to do is, there was some dust up with Dr. Jim Hamilton regarding a friend of mine, John Harris, and whether or not he's a Confederate soldier in disguise, and all kinds of different things. And, if you follow my channel, you might know about the controversy. And so what I wanted to do is take a look at a thread by Dr. Jim Hamilton, who actually today he blocked me on Twitter. For spurious reasons, let's put it that way. But I thought this thread was actually very helpful in some ways, and in some ways it isn't. And I just wanted to use it as an example of, how BigEva operates and how they assume that we operate, which is so often a false assumption. And so I wanted to use this for that reason. I hope you find this helpful, and I think that you will. Now, Dr. Jim Hamilton is a Southern Baptist. He works at Southern Seminary, and he's been defending Southern Seminary against accusations of liberalism. And the way he's been defending it has been very, very sad to see, very kind of pathetic almost. And what's so amazing about it is, this whole thread, if he actually took his own advice here, he would be in a much better position today than he actually is. And that's very typical of BigEva, as my story will unfold. You'll see. They often know exactly what to do, and they know the right thing to do, but they just don't actually do it. And so let's take the good and spit out the bad and take a look at this thread. Here's what Dr. Jim Hamilton has to say. He says, and now for a thread on how a Baptist might try to deal with suspected liberalism, even if the concerns have to do with a seminary professor. And I would say this is a good thread, by the way, just for any Christian, not just Baptist, but any Christian. He goes on, what would be a wise course of action that would obey Jesus? The first step, it seems to me, would be to go to the person directly in obedience to Matthew 18:15. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people have noticed that, Matthew 18:15, it's not really talking about, public error, public disputes, public articles, and things of that nature. It's really more about a sin against you. Matthew 18 says, this is the Christian Standard Bible. This is the new hotness amongst all the cool kids in evangelicalism. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between him and you alone. The idea here is that there's something between you and the brother, and so you go to him and tell him his fault. Hopefully you win your brother. We all know the steps of discipline in that regard. But actually, I even though this is really not, it's not talking about public error. I mean, we've seen Paul call out public error. We've seen Jesus call out public error without going to the person privately first. I do think this is actually a good idea. You should go to the person that if you're not really sure what they're saying, it sounds kind of funny, it's a good thing to do. In fact, this is often what does happen. People do go to professors privately and talk about them privately. In fact, the whole thing that started this dust up is about Dr. Fuller making some accusations against some of his old professor colleagues, and every time in the story he says, unless Jim is saying this is not true, Dr. Fuller says, I went to them. It sounded kind of funny what they were saying, so I took them out to lunch and I asked them, and they said the same thing. And so this is good advice, but this is advice that we already take. But as we'll see, Jim Hamilton doesn't actually do this. And so let's go on and continue. He says, if you're not satisfied, I'm going to assume that the people involved don't go to the same church. So the next step would be to bring some other trusted people into the conversation. Again, this is actually really good advice. It's not necessary if it's just correcting public error. I mean, there's so many examples, again, in the Bible of people that are promoting error publicly, being rebuked for it publicly without the whole steps of church discipline. The steps of church discipline are really about a sin between two people. But again, I think this is good advice, and very often this is exactly what happens from people on our side. In fact, in my own story, this is exactly what happened. There was an issue between me and a member of BigEva, a member of the guild kind of thing. He works at one of the Southern Baptist seminaries. He's a blogger. He writes for the Gospel Coalition. He writes for other blogs. He's an author. You probably have him in your library if you're an evangelical. And so that's what I did. I mean, I went to him first, and then it didn't work, and so I brought others into that. That's how I deal with controversy, because, believe it or not, Dr. Jim Hamilton, like the Christians on Twitter that are calling out Southern for what they've been doing, that they're actually Christians and they do care about what Jesus says. But as we'll see at the end here, Jim doesn't really do that. He says, do other people who understand the issues agree with your concerns? If not, maybe you should pray and reconsider whether this is your problem. This is very true. This is helpful. But the thing is, though, that there's always going to be people on both sides of every issue. And so I can go find people right now that'll tell me that Jim Hamilton is the biggest liberal of all time. And just because people agree with me doesn't make it so. And likewise, if people don't agree with me and say, no, you don't understand, Jim Hamilton is the most conservative person to ever exist in humanity, and they could find other people, to agree with that as well, it doesn't make it right. So I do think it's a good idea that if everybody seems to be saying you're wrong, you should reconsider it, but it doesn't mean that you're wrong. In fact, I did a video this week about Nicodemus confronting the Pharisees about the law of God. He said, hey, dude, you can't just condemn a man because you want to. You have to have a trial. You have to find out what things are so. And every other Pharisee was against him, but actually Nicodemus was right. So sometimes you have to be willing to be the only one that's right. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't pray or reconsider. This is actually good advice. That's what I'm saying. This thread is actually really good in some ways. But as we'll see, it's really not our side that needs to hear this so much as their own side. He says, but let's say, for the sake of discussion, that the concerns are valid. And let's say that bringing others into the conversation doesn't bring satisfaction. What next? This is very practical. I really appreciate this, because this does happen from time to time. He says, one way to pursue academic concerns of faithfulness would be to write up an academic paper for publication. Now, the problem with this, Dr. Hamilton, and I hope that you don't mind if I address you correctly, because I'm pretty sure you'll watch this, is that, we're not all academics, right? I'm not an academic, right? It doesn't mean that I can't criticize an academic, and it's possible that I don't understand your massive intellect in a certain area and I just don't get the topics that are at hand. But the reality is, many of us on our side, we don't tend to talk about the things we don't understand. We talk about the things we do understand, and we ask questions about the things that we don't understand. And sometimes those questions are pointed, but it would seem to me that a true academic would be able to make complicated things understandable and answer direct scrutiny. And so this, this might be a good idea for Dr. Fuller, because he's an academic. He could write an academic paper for publication. But this is really not good advice for all of us. Also, the other thing that I think of when I see this is that, try telling that to creationists, right? To get you have a problem with evolution. Well, why don't you write an academic paper in this evolution magazine or whatever it's called, journal, and we can talk about it. But the thing is, sometimes people are blackballed from that kind of stuff. There are certain topics that are no-nos. And so, and this, Dr. Hamilton, I mean, you're in academia. People get blackballed And so this is not really, this is nice, and I know you're trying to put things into official channels, but first of all, this is not a biblical standard. This is your own standard, and really it's not accessible for all of us. And so decent advice, but it's kind of missing the mark here. Not all of us are able to do that, Dr. Jim Hamilton. Not all of us are at your level, and I'm not saying that in a sarcastic way. It's true. I'm not telling you, Dr. Hamilton, to debate the likes of me. I don't have any qualifications. Why would you? But Dr. Fuller has actually put the challenge out to anyone, including you, Dr. Hamilton. And so I think you ought to take him up on stuff like that. That's a little bit far afield, so let's continue. He says, but let's say you don't go the debate in publication route, and let's say people who understand the issues have considered your concerns and think that there could be something to them. What would be a next step? Dr. Hamilton, this is exactly the situation that we find ourselves in. There are lots of people that are very accomplished that find our concerns very valid. And so this is the exact situation we're in. I'm so glad you went here because this is important. This is where we're at right now, sort of. What would be a good next step, he says? Going back to the idea that the people involved are members of different churches, I think a good next move would be for the persons with concerns to take his or their pastor to meet with the pastor of the person whose orthodoxy is in question. Jesus did say, after all, I will build my church. I'm an evangelical, but he didn't say I'll build this movement called evangelicalism. I teach at a seminary, but he didn't say I will build seminary. So I think concerns like this need to be brought through the local church. Really good advice. I actually agree with that. In fact, I think that seminary education should be primarily done through the local church. I don't think huge institutions, kind of like Southern, are really the proper model for the kind of thing that I think most people want to accomplish. But that being said, it's a side issue. It's more of a personal preference, and I know that you're going to defend Southern Seminary and the model to the death. But I think you're right. I think the local church bodies are the most important thing in this regard. That's the institution, right? That's the place. And again, the reality is, Dr. Hamilton, like, many of us have done this. I myself have done this, and I'm going to reveal a little bit more about my story here, if you don't mind. I had this exact situation happen, where a member of BigEva and I had a conflict together. I got nowhere with him after many, many attempts. I went to his pastor to ask for help, and I said, let me bring my pastor in too, so it's my pastor and your pastor, and I have this issue with this particular person in your congregation. Let's talk. And him and my pastor talked, and it looked like we were going to get somewhere. We were going to have a conversation where we were going to all talk. And then what happened was I posted a YouTube video about one of their friends. I think it was Matt Chandler. Something he said that I thought was very inaccurate. I thought it was very unhelpful, so I did a YouTube video about it, which is totally fine, by the way, Dr. Hamilton. I don't think you would say that doing a YouTube video is a sin. I don't think. But anyway, and they canceled the conversation. They said, nope, no way. You're going to continue to keep doing the YouTube videos. And so basically what they were saying was a stipulation for following Matthew 18, the way you're suggesting here, was that I stop doing my YouTube videos. So stop the very thing that's at question. That's the debate here. And like that's what often happens is that there's like all kinds of stipulations, Dr. Hamilton, that you demand up front before you're willing to actually follow the biblical steps. But you got to understand, Dr. Hamilton, so many of us have done this. This is great advice, and we've done this and gotten nowhere. And so that actually puts us back in the same place that you just said what would be a good next step. And so I'm with you here, but I also kind of wonder, like, did you do that before you retweeted Brad Mason about my friend John Harris? I mean, I'm pretty sure you didn't, but I don't know. That maybe we'll save that for later. So he goes on. He says, if you can't get your pastor on board with the idea that someone's orthodoxy is in question, maybe you should reconsider whether you're correct about that claim. I agree. It's probably good to reconsider if your pastor is not in agreement there, that there's a question of orthodoxy. But it doesn't mean you're wrong. Again, I just brought up the Nicodemus thing. It doesn't mean you're wrong, but it does mean I agree you should probably reconsider. He goes on, he says, if you get your pastor on board, but the pastor of the person whose orthodoxy you're challenging don't agree, maybe you take the matter to the local Baptist association. My point is that I think we should deal with these things through the churches. I agree. Point taken. I just wish that you guys would do it. You know what I mean? Like, because many of us are already doing it. I just wish you guys would. Get your pastor involved. If he disagrees with you, reconsider. Get the pastor, the person whose theologies and questions involved. If they disagree, there are next steps. But if they agree, then they can pastor the person. This is exactly right. I really appreciate these words here. What should pastors do if they become convinced that a member of their church lacks sound faith? They should seek to refute those who contradict and give instruction in sound doctrine. Amen. That's straight from the Bible. Thank you, Dr. Hamilton, for bringing the Bible into this. If the pastor's pastor and the accused pastor thinks the accused is in a better place, how should the one who raised the concern respond? Quote, love does not insist on its own way, rejoices with the truth. Love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Good stuff. Let's say the pastor's pastor and the accused does not come around. The pastor concludes that the accused holds settled convictions against the church's statement of faith. What then? Church discipline needs to happen. The church needs to go through the steps. And Dr. Hamilton, I see what you're doing here, and that's fine. But the reality is, Dr. Hamilton, you know, and I think you know. I don't want to say what you know. I think you know, and many of your colleagues have bemoaned the fact that people often hide behind church statements of faith that are very basic. If you look at a church's statement of faith that's wildly off the mark in many areas, they all pretty much look the same. I mean, there are some denominations that'll say something about the sign gifts, or there are some Unitarian denominations that'll mess with the Trinity, but most evangelical churches, like, they have the same bare bones statement of faith. And often the statement of faith of normal churches don't say clear things like, homosexuality is a sin and stuff like that. So it's not just about the statement of faith, and I think you know that. I'm not really sure why you're trying to make that the main thing here, but it's possible to be in error, but be orthodox still. So in other words, we're not saying that you're not a Christian or an unbeliever or a reprobate or teaching the doctrines of demons, but you're still wrong about something. And there's got to be a category for that. There's got to be a way we can communicate about that, where I think that there's serious error here, but I embrace you as a brother. I was saying this to someone today. Somebody called me today on my calendar. He wanted to talk about my tone, and I often take calls of people that want to have a problem with my tone and stuff like that. And they're always great conversations, by the way. When you actually talk to someone, get to know them, you understand each other better. It doesn't mean you agree, but you understand each other better. I put it in my calendar as so-and-so is going to call me to tell me off. And we talked for like half an hour. He didn't tell me off, but we were talking about John MacArthur, and he had this impression that I'm like a MacArthurite. Everything MacArthur says, I believe, and it's just not true. I think MacArthur's in serious error about many things. I think his eschatology is in serious error. His view on theonomy is in serious error. His view on alcohol, as basic as that is a serious error. I think it's a problem, a real problem. But I'm not saying that he's unorthodox. Like, I wouldn't church discipline him. And there's got to be a way for me to criticize John MacArthur in some areas, but at the same time not think he's a demon. There's got to be room for that. There's got to be a grounds for that. And I think you realize that, but you kind of try to set the rules in your favor, but also in a very inappropriate, kind of weird way, Dr. Hamilton. And so I want to talk about that in a minute. He says, church discipline needs to happen. The church needs to go through the steps. Again, it's not just about church discipline. This is about correcting error and iron sharpening iron and fighting it out and stuff like that. Like, there's room for that in the Christian church, I think. If someone doesn't hold the church's statement of faith, they shouldn't be a member of that church. If a church does its job, the seminary will have to deal with a professor who has been excommunicated for theological unorthodoxy. Let's consider what might happen if one prof is concerned that another prof is unorthodox, but the concerned does not go through the church but works up the chain of command at the school. So they're going outside the church. Instead, they're just dealing with it through the school. He says, if the concerns are about a member of the same department, but the concerned is the only one with the concern, that is, if everyone else in the department has no concern, or maybe there is no concern, or maybe the concerned should resign because the place is full of liberals. Yeah, good point. Maybe the concerned should resign or force the faculty to fire him. That's also an option too. I don't think sometimes resigning is the right way to go. I think sometimes you ought to force them to fire you. You're going to get rid of me if you don't want me here. And I have a feeling that that's what Dr. Fuller kind of did. I don't know. I've never talked to the man before. But the reality is, though, here, Dr. Hamilton, you're right. Maybe there is no concern if nobody else agrees with you. But maybe there is. Maybe there is. And I don't think necessarily quitting is always the right answer. Sometimes it might be the right answer, but not always, Dr. Hamilton. So you kind of mix it. What I don't think is so helpful about this thread is he's trying to mix in things that are ironclad, like if somebody is breaching the statement of faith at your church, yeah, of course you kick them out. But then he's kind of mixing in like these kind of more smaller disagreements, if you know what I mean. But, he's not really telling you that this is actually more his opinion than it is scripture. I kind of find that annoying, but, that's just a small thing. He says, or maybe the concern should resign because the place is full of liberals. If he moves on from the department to the dean and the dean doesn't agree, then either the dean is too liberal or maybe there's no concern at all. Again, that's true. Maybe there is no concern at all, or maybe the dean is too liberal. Both are true. We should get to the bottom of it. And that's what the whole point of this Dr. Fuller expose is. We want there to be conversation. We want there to be interaction, like real interaction, beyond the level of, hey, you're a racist. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Hold on. If it goes on up from the dean to the vice president, then to the president, but none of them agree with the concerns, then either they're all willing to tolerate liberalism, or maybe the accused is within the school's doctrinal parameters. For the sake of discussion, let's say you have a valid concern about genuine liberalism that really does transgress the school's statement of faith, but you've tried to go through the church and the chain of command and nothing has worked. What then? In some instances, this is exactly where we're at. He says, well, the person with the concerns isn't going to be the only evangelical left in the land or in the constituency. If you want to bring a school back from liberalism, go study the conservative resurgence in the SBC. I don't know if I should actually tell you this, but I'm going to, because I'm not going to out anybody. We do. That's exactly what we do. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people that say, man, I reached out to so-and-so involved in the conservative resurgence, and I asked him, like, how'd you do it? How'd you do it? Like, what steps should we take? And sometimes their advice is helpful, sometimes it's not. Like, this is what we talk about. Because there is a liberal drift, and I know you'll never admit that, but there is, and many more people than believe it today than did 2 years ago, and more people are going to believe it tomorrow than do today. And so this is actually exactly what we do. We think about this, and we want to make change. We want there to be a new conservative resurgence. We want there to be a more effective one. We do this, Jim. We do this. This is good advice. The people who brought that about took their documented evidence of liberalism at the seminaries to the churches. The churches sent messengers to the annual meeting of convention. Those messengers elected conservative presidents of the denomination. The conservative SBC presidents then worked to put conservatives on the boards of trustees, who then hired conservative seminary presidents, who hired conservative faculties. Now, no faculty member at any one of the 6 SBC seminaries denies inerrancy or the Baptist faith and message. This is kind of what we were talking about hiding behind these Baptist faith and message or these statements on inerrancy. Like, it's great if you agree with inerrancy. It's great if you agree with the Baptist faith and message. But the reality is, though, that there are people that say they agree to those things that clearly do not. In their teaching, in their words, in their actions. That's what we have documented that. And we are going to the churches. You see, you might not like how we're doing it, but we're doing it. And I'm not a Baptist, right? But I've helped out in this process. There's been movies and synodocs and things like that, and videos and articles written about this kind of stuff. And the reality is that's literally what we are doing, Dr. Hamilton. We're already following this script because this is a very good script in general. I've had some quibbles, of course. I've had some quibbles with some of the things you've said. But in general, this is very helpful, and I think that our people should read this for sure. I'm just wondering why you don't do it. But let's finish this, and then we're going to talk about what I'm referring to. He says, The point of this thought experiment is that if you love people and you love God and you're concerned about doctrinal infidelity, there are courses of actions that can and should be taken. Amen. Amen. I need a minute. Sorry about that. Ice cream is really good. That's what we're doing, man. We're taking action. Amen. More people every day are taking action. He goes on, I can imagine that there might be occasion to raise concern about what's going on in forums beyond the local church and attempts to bring about change in the denomination. How should someone seek to shape the opinions and perceptions of outsiders? Within the SBC, someone could write an article for the Baptist Press or another publication. Beyond the SBC, I want you to hear this. Someone could write for or record a video interview or a podcast with the Gospel Coalition, 9 Marks, Reformation 21, etc. BigEva says that the ways to fight the doctrinal problems that you see in BigEva is to write for BigEva. Write for Gospel Coalition, which of course nobody has access to except unless you're in the guild, unless you're in basic agreement with the doctrinal error. 9 Marks is the same way. I mean, I'm trying to be nice here, but does he really think this is going to work? I have a problem with Gospel Coalition. Lots of people do. I have a problem with 9 Marks. Lots of people. I don't know Reformation 21. I know Baptist Press. So if you have a problem with these organizations, where's approved to go? You see, he's stacking the deck here. He's trying to make it impossible to actually really have a real conversation about these issues. Like why can't I have a podcast on Fight Laugh Feast Network if I have a problem with this? Why can't I do a podcast there? Why can't I do a video interview on my YouTube channel if I have a problem with it? There's really no real issue there. Like Gospel Coalition, 9 Mark, there's nothing special about these things. They've just been effective at winning the evangelical community at this point. But Fight Laugh Feast, we're working on it, man. We're working on it. We're working on having real conversations, fighting, laughing, and feasting. We're working on actually having legitimate controversies and duking it out when we have to and getting to the bottom of things when we have to, because we know Gospel Coalition won't do that. We know 9 Marks won't do that. We know seminary interviews where you ask the softball questions to the people that are under criticism right now. Like, that's not going to move the needle anyway. All it does is make you look more shady and us look more right. And so we know that that's not the way to go, and so we confront things directly. There's no reason why I can't have a YouTube channel, Dr. Hamilton. There's no reason why I should have to go to Gospel Coalition and beg for a seat at the table there. There's no reason. But you know what, Dr. Hamilton? I tried that route. You might not know that about me. You might not know that about a lot of us, but I used to write a blog for the church. I only wrote between 5 and 10 blogs, something like that. I don't really remember. And I got memory hold. I got blacklisted. You know why I got blacklisted? I used to do videos where very gentle, very nuanced, very winsome critiques of some of the social justice words of Matt Chandler and things like that. I mean, you should watch these videos. I still have them up. They're so nice. They're so calm. There's emotion in the videos. They could not be more gentle criticisms of things that I find quite dangerous in the social justice movement. And I got taken to the woodshed for those gentle videos. I saw the Latte Mafia in action. I saw BigEva try to destroy my life because of some gentle videos I did about words I disagreed with Matt Chandler. You should watch these videos. I say, man, I love Matt Chandler. I've learned so much from him. He's a great brother in Christ, but I have these issues with what he said. And that was enough to bring the wrath of BigEva upon me. We tried that route. And we were rejected because we didn't toe the line. I know you'd like us to just shut up after we got rejected by BigEva, but it's not going to happen. Because I think that the advice you've given here, sorry about that, I think it's fantastic advice. And so many of us are doing it, man. We're taking you up on this. We're doing this because we agree this is too important. This is worth fighting for. The truth is worth fighting for. And so we're doing it. The question I have for you, Dr. Hamilton, is why are you and your buddies not doing it? Like, take your own advice, man. I saw you retweeting a thread by Bradley Mason. Like, this is the most slandering slanderer that's ever slandered, about how John Harris was a racist Confederate soldier in disguise and stuff like that. Did you go to him, Dr. Hamilton? Did you ask him about it? Like, hey, man, do you hate black people or what? Did you ask me? You know, one of your BigEva buddies, one time I said something about racism, and he said, well, you're just saying that because you're white privileged. Dr. Hamilton, let me save you the embarrassment of doing the same. I'm not white. Okay? I'm not white, man. I got African blood in these veins, my friend. Did you ask me? Hey, are you a Confederate? Somebody asked me that on Twitter today. They messaged me. He said, you know, I know Jim Hamilton. I know Dr. Hamilton. I have a question for you. I took your advice, man. This guy, shout out to you, man. I'm not going to out you, but thank you for doing this. He tweets at me and he says, private message, he says, hey, AD, man, would you consider yourself a neo-Confederate? Now, most people would be insulted by that question. I wasn't. I appreciated it. I said, no, man. No. I thought the book on the Confederacy was very interesting. I'm not a neo-Confederate. He said, okay, cool. Well, thanks for telling me. You see, the thing is, like, lots of people, Jim, take your advice on this. Take your own advice, man. And while you're at it, tell your Gospel Coalition, 9 Marks, Reformation 21, Baptist Press, Southern Baptist Convention buddies to start taking their own advice before you start smearing people because they dare to ask you a hard question. They dare to ask you a pointed question and worry about some of your colleagues, some of the stuff that they're teaching. I mean, so many of us aren't saying you're unbelievers. We're just asking questions here because we've got some concerns and we point out those concerns. It's not like we just woke up one day, decided to ask you if you were a liberal. Take your own advice because all this stuff, man, all this stuff that you posted here on Twitter, so many of us are doing it. Why aren't you? Anyway, I hope this podcast was helpful. I mean, I got a little emotional because, you know, it brings back memories of stuff that happened to me that I was involved in that makes me very sad, makes me very upset. And so many of us have tried, man. We've tried. And we'll continue to try. We're not going to give up. We'll continue to try, knowing full well that you're gonna call us racist, block us, and then continue to brag to your friends about how you blocked racists like A.D. Robles and neo-Confederates like John Harris. Not a good look, man. It's not a good look. It makes me sad for you because you're better than that, man. You are. You know not to do that kind of stuff. You know how I know you know? Because you wrote a whole thread about it here. A pretty darn good thread about what to do when you have an issue with someone. And I'm pretty sure one of them wasn't go find the worst slanderer on Twitter, retweet his research into the racist that just so happens to be the person that you don't like, and you have no idea if the racism is really true or not. You didn't even ask him, but, you know, it helps you. Screw it. You're above that, man. Anyway, I hope you found this podcast helpful. God bless. Don't forget to tune in next week on Thursday for AD on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network.